You're listening to Conversations with Chanda, where leadership gets real and personal. This is where we cut through the noise to confront the issues shaping our world, from power and justice to the heart of community change. Hosted by Chanda Smith-Baker.
Tonya Jackman Hampton. Welcome to Conversations with Chanda. This is a special conversation, y'all, because I've known Tonya since I was very young or youngish, but for sure before I graduated high school. And we have traveled our lives apart and together for a really long time. So it's really an honor to be in this conversation with you.
Oh, and you as well. I'm just both, giddy and excited all at the same time.
Before we get started, it would be great if you could just introduce yourself in terms of how you talk about yourself. What's your elevator speech? Who's Tonya?
Well, I am, if Dad were in the room, Dr. Tonya Jackman Hampton. He likes me to say the whole thing because it's a representation of him and, the legacy, quite honestly. And he's very proud of that. And I didn't grow into that until I got much older in life and understand the true importance of it. In general, I am born and raised from Minnesota. I'm a native. And I've been there most of my life up until more recently. I moved to San Diego, California, which I'm so delighted to be here. I certainly miss family and friends like yourself. But at the same token, I don't miss that snow, not at all. And so I'm glad to be here. And I also have been in HR for 30 years. So that's also part of who I am and what I represent. I've been down the path starting in the legal space and then evolved into human resource roles and really pride myself in the ability to transform individuals, teams, and organizations. I love to do that work, and I've done that across mostly healthcare systems, and I continue to do that also in the nonprofit space. So that is a representation of my work. I have two kids, grown people. One is 30, almost. She'll be 30 on May 13th. She'll be celebrating that birthday, that milestone. It's hard to believe that I've got a 30-year-old, but I've got one. It went by so fast, and you helped raise her, so thank you for that. And my son, he is 26. He's out here in San Diego with me. Actually, I should say he's 25. I'm fast forwarding him too, but his birthday will be July 13th or July 3rd. And so he is with me. My daughter's in Minnesota. My husband is in Minneapolis. We'll be soon moving here permanently in San Diego. He's graduating from law school. And so those are obviously strong influencers in my life and individuals that I live for, in addition to my broader immediate family, and then certainly friends. It pays to have a strong community at which I have expressed a bit, as well as there are people that I've not yet brought into the space, but are pretty much a part of my upbringing. I've got a legacy from Minnesota. My grandfather, Cecil E. Newman, created the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder. Actually, it was two separate names. Minneapolis Recorder and St. Paul newspaper, they came together as one, Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder. And Tracy Williams Dillard now owns the paper and is the CEO. But really, the makeup of what they did, that being my grandmother and grandfather, allowed me to understand the importance of storytelling and telling it in a factual way. And that is a part of how I show up and really understand their background and do my very best to help them contribute in any way that I can to the success that they are really trying to achieve.
Tonya, you brought up family, even with the way that I introduced you. I said your maiden name, your father's name, your family name. And there is something that is really remarkable, I think, as you get older, where you begin to understand sort of the depth of contribution of people that are around you, particularly your family. I think you think differently about it. How has that legacy that you just shared with us, how has that evolved over your life? Like, do you think your children get it? Like, what was that evolution like for you?
I'll start with the kids. That's where I laughed. It's present for them in their mind, and different ways of being present for both children. My daughter, she understands it conceptually. She knows different parts of the story and even the streets that they have names. She's familiar with. She was a part of a lot of the walks and petitioning that occurred during the murder of George Floyd, and she walked those streets, those avenues, and so it resonates with her. But I would suggest that she also wants to be able to define herself without it. And I can understand that. What is her own identity? Who is she as a woman? And how does she show up or impact the world? For my son, I think it's a distanter point of reference. Both children know that it's a part of their history, but I would say that he didn't, frankly, have a familiarity with the streets until after the murder of George Floyd. And I drove him around, right? And I said, these are the corridors that Mom grew up in, the buses that she rode, from whether it was Chicago Avenue or 4th Avenue. I know that you're familiar with those routes. And then I also took him around some of the avenues in the surrounding areas, described what the old Kmart used to look like. And that, I think, if you asked him, he'd have some, clarity about what he experienced, but it's not as in the forefront as I would suggest myself or my daughter for that matter. And that's just to give a contrast, right? It doesn't mean that there's one better than the other.
Sure.
I think as they get older, it will be even a more prominent memory. That's what I hope for, in the sense of it will lead and guide them, and they'll be able to reflect back. That's really, though, a perspective I hold based on my own experience. My own experience, when I start from the very beginnings of age 5, it's one of the more vivid memories I have of my grandfather. He would give me money. And it was a coin here and there. And, it wasn't like, lots of, but for a kid, it was, right? And so I was proud that he would extend that to me. And I reflect on it now, and I've labeled it, whether it's accurate or not, as his way of extending wealth, giving some capital to his offspring, to his family. And so I hold that because I know he was proud when he did it. He smiled, and he often gave it. And that for me gives me the understanding that, obviously wealth and economic growth is really important. And how do I integrate that into the things that I do in my life and or people around me? How do I educate them about what I know? I would say that there are different brimlets that show up as a result of the activities that they took part in. And it's richer now. And one of the things that's richer is the connectivity, right? The importance of community, the importance of strong relationships, and truly doing your very best to identify different ways to connect other people and to give us a human capital, right? Or agency in terms of the human relationships that we might have. And then being respectful of people's stories, that too shows up for me.
My uncle, folks that have listened to this podcast know, was the first African-American superintendent of schools in Minneapolis. And I remember growing up, and like with any public position, some people are down with you, some people aren't down with you, right? And I remember there was a really difficult leadership period of his tenure where they had to close schools. And I remember being in schools and having teachers say things to me as though I was an adult that had some sort of choice on who my relative was, or choice in, or influence in his decision. I remember being very awkward about it. And as I've gotten older, I have realized a couple of things. One is my ability to sort of witness his leadership, witnessed it in good times, witnessed it when it wasn't great. Watch him with others as they debated and deliberated and discussed what was happening in community. And I think similarly to the journey you're talking about, I realized there was a point in which I wanted to establish on my own and then
Mhm.
realize I was never establishing on my own.
Right.
Right? Like I just never was doing that. And not just my uncle, because my mother, my father, they all had ways of being in the community that we are from. And so, it feels to me like I've heard you talk about it more, and I'm just wondering if there's other ways that maybe it's um made you more solid perhaps on the challenges or the opportunities that you faced in your own leadership.
Oh, yes, for sure. And some of it was subconscious and others parts of it weren't, right? And many women in my family were very direct but soft, right? So people who I would characterize as the family matriarch or regal or very graceful, but you understood where you stood. And what that meant is they were very, right, honest about their point of view and perspective, but respectful. And so that characteristic certainly is one that I hold and carry. I also grew up in a surrounding of women that believe that in order to maintain your strongness or credibility, you shouldn't cry. And that, in some respects, I complied with, and in other respects, I don't anymore. And I don't anymore because of some of my own tragedies that I've had, and realize that crying is a part of healing, and that it's okay not to be okay. That some of the, right, readings I've done. But I also am, still biased that holding cry and tears in certain situations, just like they did, is a way to exude or exhibit your strength. And again, that's from the experiences and how people have taught me, the women in my life have taught me.
All of it was about survival
Yes.
in many respects. And I understand that you also said George Floyd's name. And so anytime his name is spoken, I try to give a moment of pause and reflection of that period of time. And you were also in HR, you said, for 30 years. And so, man, the practice of HR seems to have evolved quite a bit since you got started in it.
Mm-hmm.
What stands out to you in terms of the evolution? And I only bring George Floyd's name into it because it feels like it really changed the way that I've even leaned into it afterwards. It feels like the culture within organizations became way more informed loudly by race, gender, age, more so than I had seen it. I don't know if that is reflective of your own experience or not.
Yeah, I would say that it is. There's been certainly, I'd describe it as ebbs and flows. And depending upon the organization, there has been more, definitive language around the constructs of diversity, equity, inclusion, and racism, what it is, what it isn't. And I would say that of the experiences that I've had, there's been a couple different trends. One is the tripping upon what are the words that you use. That's no different than where we are today, right? Like as I've evolved in the space of HR, or very specifically in when I was in the diversity role, it was how do we define diversity? How do we define inclusion? How do we define equity? And today we are having those same conversations. And in fact, we're trying to come up with other words to define so that we don't, right, offend or upset or subtract ourselves from certain circumstances or getting certain resources. My true belief is it's a chase. It's a distraction. And I think we have to, as HR leaders, as business owners, get very clear on what we believe, what are our values, and lead from that. Challenge ourselves to think new ways and see it as a way to grow rather than something to inhibit us from moving forward. And so that's what I hope for in this current space of confusion. Another trend I would say is that being honest about where you are at, let's say demographically, right, in terms of the people that are in your organization. What are your gaps and what are your strengths? and the conversation I really hope people continue to have more often is that the differences in the visibility of our people in our organizations is no different than the visibility of the what's in the black or what's in the green in our organizations in terms of money. You know, however you refer to your books, your P&L, what are we, you know, what's the profits that we're gaining? What are the loss? I don't want to confuse the idea of comparing people to numbers, right?
But I get the point.
But the point is it's a gap. How do we close it? If we're not able to make a certain amount of profit or get a certain amount of gain in terms of footing in the market that we're trying to be in, we focus to increase that. Similarly, from a people perspective, how do we make sure that we have the right talent that we need? And it doesn't have to be a racial build always. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is be honest with yourself and identify where you have an opportunity to improve certain talent in your organization and cast a net as far as you can to get different individuals into your organization.
Yeah. Do you, you described it as a chase, and there's a lot of people, I mean, talking to me about websites in language. Why do you describe it as a chase?
I think it's similar to the chase is you're just running and you're not really going at a certain level of productivity. It's like the old adage of a hamster on a treadmill and just going and not having a direction. And so the current, I think, climate is causing us to want to determine whether or not we're using the right terms. And that's a good exercise for a period of time. But I think that most organizations have already defined the terms that are being challenged today. So sure, you want to define some terms, but let's identify some other ones rather than the ones that we've been using that have been working and that we really need to, continue to focus on the strategies rather than the definitions.
Right. And it seems, I mean, it's an opportunity to see whether or not your values aligned. I mean,
Right.
how you are is how you treat people, how you are, what your goals are, what you're trying to achieve, sits squarely in the middle of this conversation. It feels like it's creating a certain amount of angst and confusion. And certainly it's creating a lot of fear, which is why we are in this conversation, because you recently wrote a book about fear
It did.
and how one can be in relationship with fear.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about the journey to becoming an author.
Oh, gosh. It was quite the deniable journey for me. I started out wanting to achieve my one goal for completing my degree, my doctorate degree, which was my dissertation. So I had to write and identify a topic that was important. And at the time, I'll come back 360, that, my grandmother was dying of ovarian cancer. And I was also an executive in a healthcare organization. And I was a mother and a wife. And so with those challenges and ones I've not mentioned, I knew I still needed to complete my dissertation in order to graduate. I also knew I wasn't alone. And so I wanted to identify who were other people in this community that were experiencing the similar emotions that I was experiencing so that I could have a community that I could relate to and that I could identify what are some remedies for dealing with emotions like fear, doubt, worries, stress, whatever came up in those conversations, which, were for me as well as for the people that I spoke to. So that was the start of the journey. And then over the years, I, after completing the dissertation, I quite frankly, I put it aside, never thought I would write again, never wanted to write again. And I then, however, had the wonderful opportunity to work for a boutique firm in Silver Spring, Maryland. The organization was called Cook Ross. It's now referred to as Be Equal. And Howard Ross, who's one of the individuals that did a testimony on my book, He is a very long lifetime friend. He's now someone I refer to as my big brother. And he actually is, he's tall. He's very tall. He's like 6'5". And so that's Big Brother Howard. So he, and all the other thought leaders that I had the opportunity to work with at that firm inspired me to do more writing. And in the process too, I collected a lot of data from a number of the different workshops that I did on the same core questions that I asked in the dissertation. What are your fears? How do you respond? And what is your relationship with your fear? That helped me to crystallize the data. And then I met my publisher at Wise Inc. and Dara Bevis. She really helped me, who now is my sorority sister, and you being a sorority sister as well. It's such a wonderful thing. And I will ditto back and say that, I talked to her twice. I met her at the Women in Business Awards actually probably about 5 years before I actually wrote the book, and walked away. I said, nope, I'm not doing it. And then I saw her again at Women in Business, and she said, let's talk. So we talked, and she encouraged me to write it. So I did. And her team was phenomenal. It was the best experience that I think I could have had as a first-time writer. They were very responsive, and they were coaches, and at different phases. People who helped me to refine the writing, people who helped me to edit it, helped with the cover, helped with the title. Dara and I went back and forth once, and it was just, I think, a testament to how much she learned about the work during the time that I was working with them. So,
Yeah, I think that, I mean, she's so good at that. And I think, as you were talking, you were saying names. And she is one of those people, and I think we've all had those people that sort of see what you have in you and just sort of poke it all out of you, right? Like write a book, or someone that, go for this role, go for this thing. Can you talk about just perhaps the influence of other mentors that you've had? Because you talked about Howard, because I'm sure all of that sort of emerged as you were writing. But I just think that it's just a wonderful thing to just sort of acknowledge the people that supported you in that particular journey.
Oh gosh, there's so many to name. Thank you for asking the question, and I know I will miss someone. But I always kind of go with what's the immediate thing that comes up for you. And the first person that hit me was Michelle Miller. She is she's now an endearing person that I refer to as an aunt. And she's a general counsel that used to work at Medtronic with me. And her, along with another leader, Rick Carrion, who's actually here in California, he was a sales leader at Medtronic. I worked directly with him, but him and Michelle had, business relations work that they did together. And because of their belief and their connection, so belief in my work and their relationship, they pretty much, created a pact to make sure that I had opportunities at Medtronic. And I would say that absolutely the successes that I had while at that organization are a result of them primarily. I also worked with several others, Lee Butcher, Sandy Harris. These are names that would be known mostly, obviously, in the state of Minnesota. Sandy's now out, though, in Maryland.
Yeah,
And just those are examples of people that helped me along the way. I will say, too, I was fortunate in my career to have a number of different Black leaders that I reported to. I don't take that lightly. I feel like I was fortunate to have people who I could look up to that look like me, and I could observe and watch them do the things that they were successful at, or just learn from them in the opportunities things that they struggled with, and incorporate either the strengths or opportunities into my own leadership. And so those people come to mind, and had it not been for not having those leadership relationships, again, though, I would not have, I don't think, been as wise about the different steps that I could take.
Yeah, and you name sort of a diversity of people because I know them, and then sort of called out having the opportunity to witness Black leaders. And we have a very diverse audience of listeners. And I don't want to skip past that particular point too quickly because that is really important. We talk about it also in school and education, where it's important that brown and Black children have teachers that reflect them. I think it allows you to access possibility differently. And it's also important to have other people in your life that represent other diversities to like balance it out. But what in particular were some things that you were able to glean, if you could, from the Black leaders? Because I just think this is such a good point for us to talk about as we get ready to jump into fear, because it
Mm.
shows up differently. The fears show up differently for all of us. And then there is some consistent fears or navigations that we've had to have as Black women.
Yeah. One is, get as many possible mentors as you possibly can at different stages in your life. And that, sticks out for me from as early as my very first, what I'd call corporate job, the one that I could say is on my chart for, what's the first career I ever had. And riding an elevator with Annette Miner is another person at Piper Jaffray. And she tapped me. She said, I haven't seen you before. I want to get to know you. And at that point, Annette was, and still, I feel like I could call her today. I've watched her kids grow up, certainly on, it's been on social media, but nonetheless, I know I could reach to her as someone that would, give me some ideas and concepts. The other thing I would say is that being mindful of the stories that people tell you and what you should or should not share about those stories. I had a leader in my one of my first HR roles, and we created a relationship such that obviously she gave me work and we interacted on what that work was, but at the same token, I had the benefit of building a relationship with her, and then even now it's beyond. We're still friends, and in that experience, what I learned is that she confided in me, and I had to be careful about, not sharing that story. And so it was to the extent of I was in a situation, she was there, and I named a person's name, but I didn't tell the story. She called me on it later and said, I just want you to be careful. I know you and I've talked about that person, but please, be careful, mindful of even just saying the person's name. And so I took note of that, right? And so it helped me to realize the importance, even more so, of being mindful of the stories that you hear from other people, but not bringing them into another situation. And then finally, I would say accountability around work, right? So deliver. What's the work that you've been asked to do, and make sure that you deliver. And if you can't, explain why, and then identify ways to solve the problem. Don't just bring a problem forward.
Right. Yeah. Very good lessons. And I think that people that invest in you have a way of being supportive and saying, and you can't do that.
Right?
And you need to do that. It's like, it's funny that you're like defining people by, auntie, and like they're like a brother. Because when you get to that stage, it'd be like, girl, what was you thinking? And then,
Yeah, exactly.
like, don't do that no more. And so I think that we could both name a number of people that have sort of come alongside us and pushed us. And I think in this particular moment in season where people are feeling quite stressed, one of the things that I like to call, and when people ask me about self care, I'm like, part of my self care is reminding myself that I'm not alone, and all the people that have invested in me, that I've invested in, and that have supported me and are here if I need to make a phone call. So, fear,
Mm-hmm.
what are you telling us about fear in this book?
Yeah. I'm trying to give people number one, a place and space to express their hardest emotions that we don't allow, particularly when we think about the image of a leader. We don't give leaders a place and space, although I do convey in the book that everyone is a leader. You have to be a leader of yourself first in order to lead others. And so the book is hopefully one that speaks to anyone and everyone that picks it up. And I have the opportunity to find my book in their hands, if you will. And I also am talking about to disregard the path that we have always heard, the flight, fight, or freeze, so that people don't get stuck in thinking that that's the only thing that we should do if something scares us. How do we run away, or how do we just disregard it, avoid it? And I give a path for helping people to experience fear, while at the same time, how can they engage, explore, and execute rather than the fight, flight, or freeze? And then I also talk about what are the common fears that came out of the research that I did with the various different leaders that I spoke to, and boiled it down to, while there were 16 universal fears that showed up, I boiled it down to 4. And they are fears that we've heard before, but what was really nice that I appreciated about the work is it affirmed some of the messages that we've heard. One of the number one fears that people have is public speaking, and it's because they worry about failure. So that's the first one. The second one is the effect that we are going to have on the audience, the impact that we might have, and whether or not we're going to be successful. The third is uncertainty, which is really a hovering term right now here today, the uncertainty that we are experiencing. The reality is uncertainty is always around us. And so how do we reflect on when we have been successful under uncertainty and utilize those experiences to be successful going forward? And then finally is the D, and the D is distrust. We often distrust the audience or the people that we are interacting with. And so how can we ground ourselves in trust so that we can engage and still execute what we're trying to take on?
It feels to me like, as part of writing this particular book, it was probably cathartic. And you probably had to confront a couple of fears yourself around it. Can you share an example of what you had to confront related to fear? And did you have to put your own theory to work on the
Absolutely.
inspiration?
Yeah.
Can you share something about that?
I can. And I participated in the question answering, if you will. I had to, as a part of the dissertation process. So my thoughts are contributed to your point. And I tried to create a band of what are the fears that I experience. And on one continuum, I talk about the easier ones, not liking tomatoes, just avoiding eating tomatoes. And that's what I think fear can be. It can be something that's as simple as something you're avoiding. On the other side of that continuum, though, there were 3 fears that I shared in the preface intentionally to get them out of the way so that we could have the conversation about all the other ones. And one of them is the point about my grandmother. She was dying, and I am fearful of losing someone, not necessarily death itself, but losing people. The second thing is really illness, dealing with that personally myself, and then illnesses that other people have had. And illness, not in the sense of, you got a cold, but I am a breast cancer survivor, or, I've experienced other people that have had terminally ill illnesses that they're dealing with. And then the final one, which is the hardest one of them all, is I grew up in a predominantly white high school and was one of less diverse individuals in my high school. And as a result, often knew what it was like to be different, and different in a way that people didn't treat me kindly. And so not unique to me as a person of color, or as a woman for that matter, but I do have anxiety around racism and being treated unfairly, or being treated as though I'm other. And I have worked really hard throughout my life to not go there first, and be very mindful of what are the things that I can do different if, in fact, someone has given me feedback, for instance, so that I can always challenge myself to perform harder. But there are also obvious, and there are obvious times when we know that we have experienced something that was racial or based on our gender or some other difference that we hold as people. And so I, have to make sure that I am gauging those appropriately. And when I do, make sure that I talk to the person about it or take the appropriate steps and processes to get to a better resolution so that the next person who looks like me has a different experience, better experience than I did.
I'm like sort of smiling because you're like some of them are more obvious, and I was thinking like obvious to who?
Right, exactly. Who is
I
it obvious
mean,
to? Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
sort of the question of the hour,
It is. Because
all
it's
the
not always
hours and all
obvious
the
to the person
minutes.
that says it. Yeah, exactly. It's more obvious to you, but not the person that says it.
I mean, do you think there'll be a point where
I
when people are treated unfairly in the workplace based on identity, do you think do you think it's becoming more obvious as we talk about it more?
Okay, so that's a deep question.
I know, I'm
So
sorry.
that's okay. So the first thing I would say is that fear is the intersection between diversity and inclusion. And so our ability to be inclusive gets intercepted by our comfort, our level of relation with another person, and what we feel as a connection. And if we as individuals don't feel that connection, we don't engage as deeply as we might with someone else. You and I will engage differently than someone that I might meet first time. And so being aware of that, right, and understanding what are your own anchors that you can use for yourself in order to get grounded so that you can have an authentic conversation is important. But then getting back to your question, the ability for organizations or individuals to be inclusive, like at an all-time high, and not hurting people. I hope for one day, but I also am realistic in saying it might be impossible to its fullest because we're different, and our ability to know what is offensive to someone else, we don't always know. We also do have a responsibility, though, to be wise about what on a general sense can be disrespectful for someone, right? I've often said that your authenticity should not be trumped by integrity, right? So you should always maintain the degree of respect and integrity while also being honest with someone.
Right. So on both sides of the equation, right? I'm gonna make it a little black and white, but I don't intend to. But you have people that are uncomfortable navigating spaces that are more diverse, and you have people that are diverse that sometimes have challenges navigating spaces that are less familiar with how they show up as leaders. And in either case, leaders are taught to sort of hide what they are uncertain about or vulnerable, the
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability, right? Like there's no real place. Like you're conditioned in many respects to suppress those things. So, what is the consequence of suppressing the not
Mm.
knowing or the fear that you have, particularly related to the topic we're talking? Like, what is the consequence of that in the workplace?
Yeah. The consequence of that is trust. So your direct reports will feel that you are not being authentic or that you are not being transparent if you are um, not able to hold back those worries, doubts, and fears without them visibly being able to tell. Typically, in my experience, people have been able to read and understand that you're not telling completely how you feel. And people are smart enough to know that you're human, obviously, and that all humans have emotions and reactions to certain situations. And so as a leader, I think you have a responsibility to express how you are feeling about something, and however, being also encouraging when those emotions are not positive emotions.
Yeah. And you talked about sort of the long-standing way of of dealing with it. And so there is a book called The Fearless Leader that a lot of us do know and have referred to. And your book is the myth of that, right? That it's a myth that you're leading with fear, not you're not fearless, but you have fear. And in spite of it, you continue to show up every single day. How did you arrive at that title, and why did you think it was important to identify that as a myth?
hmm I wanted to give people the comfort for the innermost, deepest feelings that they are having, and give them a okay nod that it's okay to have those feelings, and also to give them the opportunity to express them. So throughout the book, there are opportunities for people to journal, and one immediate step towards getting fearless, if you will, is to acknowledge that fear. I'm also on the other side of the spectrum of believing that there's not a ultimate level where you feel no fear at all. I think we say that, and I think our fears lessen. However, over our lifespan, we get worried, have doubts, have fears about different things. And so it's what I often refer to is that fear is a way or a mechanism for our own brains to make decisions about what to do and what not to do. And that's where it can be useful. That it's important to recognize what we are afraid of so that we can coach ourselves or come up with the tools and resources to really equip ourselves to take on that object, that circumstance, that thing that's in front of us.
Right. So fear can save your life.
It sure can.
It could maybe save your job. So sometimes you gotta keep your inside voice.
Sometimes you got to keep the inside voice on, and you got to coach yourself. Saying maybe I shouldn't say it that
Maybe I
way.
shouldn't say that because I'm afraid I won't be here afterwards.
Right.
That's a useful fear response.
Yes.
Right. Something alerts you that you probably don't need to do that thing, say that thing, go that place.
Right.
There are other things and ways that you mentioned, like public speaking, where you're fearful and it actually holds you back from leading in your fullest leadership voice.
Right.
And that, I think, is what you're talking about, is having a different relationship with that type of fear.
Yes. And the added distinction I will add too is there's a difference between admitting what your fear is and guiding, dictating, and leading people through fear, through the lens of fear, right? Where you are scaring them. That's the type of fear we don't want in organizations. And that's the type of, I think, fearless leader or fearless organization that folks are talking about, or in particular, Amy Edmondson, who I highly respect in terms of how she describes and talk about fearless organization or fearless leadership. On the other side of that, I also would suggest, I haven't had a conversation with her, but I would also suggest that having open dialogue about what are the emotions that we have as humans is a good place to be, so that we know what they are and can work towards improving them, or work successfully while still holding those emotions.
Right. And Amy has done a lot of work. I've had the privilege of moderating a conversation with Amy.
Yes, you
and
have.
actually spending some time with her at Harvard, which I refer to her work quite a bit because it ultimately comes down to the word trust.
Yes.
Right. And one's ability, a culture, right, that you want to create. And the more trusted it is, the more vulnerable it is.
Yes.
Typically, there's less mistakes, there's more honesty, there's a business advantage of being able to create a space of honesty, and maybe to some sense vulnerability, because another one of those fears are, I made a mistake, I'm afraid to say it. And you
That's
don't
right.
say it,
Yeah.
then the organization doesn't learn from it. It costs money, it costs you consequence to your job,
That's
in
right.
some cases. And so I love the idea that you brought that into culture, and that we sometimes see fear as something that is problematic. Or really, in some of the work that she has done, and certainly you are suggesting it in your book, that it actually not only makes you a better leader, it means the teams that you are in charge of are also better and stronger, And if an organization adopts a culture of moving through it, naming it, reflecting on it, and creating action, can actually be to a positive benefit.
Yes, 100%. And I say 100% in the sense that I agree with you. And I referred earlier to the engage, explore, and execute. That can be used at an individual, team, and organizational level. So helping people to name what their fears are, helping them to identify where have they done well, where have they not done so well, and then creating a plan that they can execute. And it has profound results. I've seen it as a result of coaching with people or teams, and I've used it in my own leadership from an HR organizational standpoint, as well as a consultant.
Yeah. So you out here just like embracing fear and doing new stuff besides writing books right now, or what else? Tell me more. Tell us more.
Yeah. So I am working with leaders individually as well as teams on really helping them to create strategies for transformation. And I'm also doing that mostly in the healthcare space. While certainly I will expand amongst different industries, healthcare is my niche or my love. And then I also to work with nonprofit organizations.
Right on. We keep evolving. When you were talking earlier, you were talking about fear in organizations. And so, in this climate, in this culture, it feels like every other conversation I have, particularly in the social sector, has something to do with the political disruption that we're feeling. And I don't care what side of the aisle you sit on, I think we feel that there is tension in the environment, or certainly concern about where the economy is going, where's our foreign affairs going, where's our financial health as a nation going, and where and how are we going to relate to each other. And in the social sector, there's a lot of churn. And the way that even people ask me how I'm doing is like this little head tilt thing, which is like,
Mm-hmm.
it is very disruptive in a lot of ways. But what happens if you're leading through fear? Like, if that is your lens where like the sky is falling, like, do you have anything that you can share in terms of what does that do to your body, to your leadership, to your organization, if your lens is sort of like everything is going to, what's the saying, hell in a handbasket or something?
Right.
Yeah.
It's restricted, right? So I think that you can restrict yourself, you can restrict your team members, and you can restrict as a result results that you will achieve. And so it's getting back to some of the basics of really getting tuned in to what are your values and what's your purpose, and using those as guardrails to springboard where you are questioning yourself as to whether or not you should do something. Ask yourself, well, what are my values, and why am I here? What am I trying to do? If you can reset on that, then you can really get, I think, directed, whether it's through experience or having worked with individuals on this concept. It helps people to be able to get unstuck.
Is there any other awakening that you have in the book that you want to share?
It actually is hidden in the title. Don't believe the hype. You don't have to be fearless to be a leader. You absolutely, right? It's okay to have fear or emotions. And what you owe to yourself and people around you is to know what those emotions are and identify the tools, the resources, the partners that can help you move forward so that you can have a successful outcome. And the only way that I believe the only way you can have a successful outcome is if you have a plan. What are your actions? And you learn actions through other people, through your past, in terms of what has worked, what hasn't worked. And then you have to be willing to try again, so back to Amy's perspective of how do you reflect on the mistakes so that you can refine and create another plan and try it again.
Yeah. And you said a little bit earlier, like the hamster wheel or the rat race and all the words that we use. And I think embedded in that language and what you just said is a big piece of not only understanding your fears, but of leadership is creating space for reflection, which I imagine is why you have those reflective questions in the book, what role do you think reflection has, particularly in moments that are high tension? Because I think when you're in the middle of a crisis or when you're in the middle of something, it's very easy to like keep your head down and keep moving. And
Mhm.
so, do you have any advice around the importance of reflection, particularly in moments where you feel like you don't have time?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Because it can be daunting to think about how do you do that in a knee jerk circumstance. But not my own model. It's actually one I learned from Cook Ross, Howard Ross, and that is pause. And it's a very quick exercise. Pay attention to what it is that you're feeling. What are the things that you've done in the past, the actions that you've taken in the past, to understanding those actions or understanding other people's perspectives, to really seeking out what beyond what you've already heard, what you've learned, and gaining that perspective from other people to really then execute, understand how do you evolve and move forward. You have to do that pretty fast in those really quick circumstances, but it's worked. For me, I had the benefit of being one of the many different facilitators, thought leaders that delivered his work in a multitude of different organizations, and really helping people identify what are the steps that they can take when they are experiencing a situation where they might have otherwise done something different that was harmful.
Right, right. Well, if the listeners want to find out more about who you are, the book, or the work that you're leading, where would they go?
Yes, there are two places. One is to go to www.Dr. Tonya Jackman Hampton. Don't confuse it with Jackson. That happens. But it's
Right.
Jackman Hampton. That's one place. The other place is Amazon. If you choose not to go to Amazon, you can go to Itasca, book publishing company. Though that's the third place to go as well. You didn't ask me when is the next time I want to see you, and it would be great to
When
have
is the
you out in
next
San
time you'd
Diego
like
again.
to see me, Tonya? And
It
hopefully
would,
in San Diego.
yeah, exactly. It would be great to have you in San Diego again.
I appreciate you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the
You as well.
thoughtfulness and for being on Conversations with Chanda.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
If you'd like to explore more content and join our community, find us at conversationswithchanda.com. We have a wonderful collection of episodes featuring notable guests that you can enjoy on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And I also invite you to follow our journey and add us on Instagram at Conversations with Chanda. Until next time.